Well, thank you everyone for joining us at what is the last panel session of this very busy QD 2018. Everyone had a good QD so far? Lovely. So this one, we've saved what must be the probably the trickiest conversation, or some of the most sort of introspective conversation to have for last in this panel. We're going to be looking at the state of skepticism around the world. Is it fit for purpose? Are we doing things the right way? And are other things we should be paying attention to? And so joining me, I have a panel that represents skepticism from all around the world. And first of all, I'd just like you to go along the panel and introduce yourselves, if that's okay, starting at the far end there.
Sure. My name is Klingenberg. I am the president of the European Council of Skeptical Organizations, aka the evil overlord of Europe. So it's an umbrella organization that has all the national European skeptic organizations underneath it. Yeah.
I'm so glad we could get Catherine Tate, Donna Noble on our panel. It's a callback to yesterday.
I have to Google who that is.
I am Jonathan Jarry. I'm a science communicator with the McGill Office for Science and Society, and I'm also the co-host of the Body of Evidence podcast.
I am not Thomas Smith, but I do know how to read an airplane schedule, so I'm Eli Bosnick. I'm one of the co-hosts of God-Awful Movies, The Scathing Atheist, The Skeptocrat, and Citation Needed.
Excellent. Yeah, sorry, Thomas unfortunately deplatformed himself for this panel.
You heard there was going to be a Q&A and he walked out.
And I'm Michael Marshall. I'm the project director of the Good Thinking Society, a charity here in the UK. So we have Europe, mainland Europe, we have the UK, we have the US, we have Canada. We have a decent spread of where the sort of centres of skepticism, or in what we see a lot of in our sort of current views of skepticism are. And we probably have a good handle, I guess, then on some of the issues that we're facing. So perhaps I could start by asking each of our panelists to briefly summarise what the state of skepticism is in your sphere, and what kind of issues you're facing, and that we can then delve into in a bit more detail.
So, building on fire? To be fair, skepticism in Europe is very diverse because each country has different priorities and different values and what it focuses on. And also it depends on the religiosity of the country. So some countries have more atheist groups and have more skeptic groups. So it's really hard to kind of summarize it. In each country, the skeptic movement is trying its best with varying degrees of success.
That was very diplomatic. I feel kind of awkward talking about the state of skepticism in Canada, because who am I to do this? But I've been a skeptic for about 10 years. I've been involved with the Center for Inquiry, the Montreal chapter, and all that. And in my experience, I'm a little disappointed by the state of skepticism in Canada. Especially in Quebec, we're very fragmented along a number of lines. We are a French-speaking province within an English-speaking country. So, of course, we have a linguistic divide between the Francophones on one hand and the Anglophones on the other. We have the skeptics on one hand and the atheists within the other. And within those subgroups, there are further subdivisions because you're not atheist enough and you're not skeptical enough. And so we have a lot of small groups, especially on the French side. I see a lot of antiquated business models. They seem to be quite stuck in the 1990s. And it's unfortunate because it always boils down to people, right? And if the people have personality conflicts, then nothing gets done. So yeah, I'm a little disappointed right now.
Oh, America. I mean, American skepticism has the benefits and problems that the United States has. We love our celebrities. We love our famous skeptics. And even if that means that their skepticism stopped in 1992 and sort of hasn't moved on from there, and it comes with all the problems that come with that, but also all of the benefits. A tremendous amount of the skeptical podcasts got their start in the United States. A tremendous amount of the skeptical YouTube channels got their start in the United States. And sort of there are dark and light sides to that. What I will say is that nobody elevates bad actors like American skeptics. And we're working to fix that now. But the truth is, it is more complicated than the internet trolls. The truth is we have, in my opinion, some of the best and some of the worst that skepticism has to offer.
Fake news, that's fake news.
I think from a UK perspective, it's a little different. Well, I think in many ways it's very different from the US because here in the UK, we don't have huge, long-established skeptical organizations. The skeptical community in the UK started very much from the bottom up with sort of self-organizing skeptics in the pub groups, which leads it to having quite an easy access to being involved, to running groups. We have groups, I mean, who here runs a Skeptics in the Pub group or goes to a regular Skeptics Pub group in the UK?
That's everyone.
Loads and loads of people. So I think it has an easy barrier to access. But I think it also comes, unfortunately, with the downside of when it comes to activism, there's not anybody telling people what to do, which can be a useful thing in direction, but a terrible thing in terms of people will reject that, quite rightly. People are very independent-minded. So I think that's one of the things with the UK skeptics scene, I think, is it's very independent-minded and people doing their own thing, but it can mean that sometimes there's a little bit of lack of direction on some activist things when it comes to then tackling things at a local level. I think that's my kind of take on it, really. So I think that's kind of a sort of a grounding on where we are. But Jonathan, I want to pick up on something that you mentioned about fragmentation. And Claire, I'm sure you can speak to this an awful lot, being with EXO and having so many different languages, so many different cultures and organizations. How do we deal with the fragmentation of our movement across barriers like language, across barriers like organizations and their different goals? How much experience we have and what can we do you think?
Before you chime in, I would just say I'm not even sure that the fragmentation is occurring because of languages in Quebec. I mean, we do have a history with sovereignty and Quebec separating from Canada that certainly is playing a role there. But I think it might just be personality conflicts.
Mm.
Well, in Europe, it really is languages most of the time. Sometimes it can be personality as well, but mainly it's languages. Because EXO has 23 countries under itself. Most of them have a very different language. We have a huge problem when it comes to material because we have the age groups of skeptics range from 20 to 85, and with different degrees of understanding English. And the skeptic movement is in English. So we have to always put into our budget a huge cost for translating because we cannot expect our members to go and translate all these documents for free. It takes a long time. It's a huge bump in the road. And there's currently, I mean, learning English is the only solution, but it's not like one we can just turn on. Yeah.
Mm. So that's kind of a language fragmentation, but it's fair to say there's probably also, I'd say, like an ideology fragmentation kind of going on amongst those who think that we should be atheists, those who think that we shouldn't be atheists, other kind of ideological fragmentation. Is that something that the panel have experienced in your own kind of areas of skepticism?
Progressives versus classical liberals.
I think, and I'm certainly not the first to point this out, I think that a lot of the sort of fragmentation that we've seen within the skeptical movement has come largely because of the growth of the skeptical movement. I mean, we were a absolutely tiny movement several years ago, and the internet ballooned us out into this large, uncontrollable group. And so when I hear about our fragmentation, there are a lot of things that we can attribute it to, everything from the anonymity of the internet and the fact that there are no gatekeepers to the word skeptic, right? So you can call yourself a skeptic on YouTube or Twitter and be nothing of the sort, right? You can be a 9/11 truther and call yourself a 9/11 skeptic. But at the same time, I think as a group, we were not prepared to clean our own houses in quite the same way. And so I think what we see a lot of the time is the old guard many times are celebrities, they are well-known, they're the people who first got us into skepticism. And when they and their ideas don't keep up with the time, we find ourselves fragmenting when actually what we can do is we can evolve with the people who are entering our movement. We can evolve our ideas. And we do this very well in certain ways, and we do it very badly in others. So I guess that's my answer to the fragmentation is we have a lot of old guard who have been holding on very tightly to control, but as we grow as a movement, the movement needs to move forward. And those who don't want to move it forward aren't really skeptics anymore.
Anyone else want to comment on that?
Well, yeah, the sharing of the ideas is so important, and that's another problem with the language barrier because there's so many people doing wonderful things all across Europe, For example, in Romania, we have Ovidiu Covaciu, who started a program to teach parents why they should vaccinate kids and teach them the basic biology and the basic chemistry of it. And it's a wonderful program and has huge success. Almost all the parents that go through it actually didn't choose to vaccinate their kids. But it's in Romanian. And of course, we would have to go in through it and translate it. And it's just so much of this work. And the idea sharing, I was telling the guys before so they wouldn't think that I'm criticizing them. But as a European skeptic, when I go to the US and I talk about the stuff they do, they're so surprised that we don't live on trees. And it's like, oh my God, oh wow, and
that's so cute.
That's so cute. And I saw that especially now this summer at Nexus when Marsh had this talk about the Good Thinking Society and what they have accomplished. The audience was amazed. They thought like, oh yeah, so that we have the US and that's it. So, and they were like surprised. Wow, you did so much work. You actually are doing something. You are reaching some success. And you could just see the fascination on their faces. Like, we had no idea the world existed, So yeah, so this kind of patronizing attitude also helps the sharing of ideas because when there's someone from a smaller country who comes up with an idea and goes to someone in a bigger country to share it, they usually say, "Oh yeah, that's cute. Yeah, don't. We'll figure it out," and they don't really pay attention to what we have to say. So that's why, for example, we want to really band together as Europe to have a stronger voice of what we're doing. By the way, talking about that, Diana Barbosa right over there in Portugal, they made a wonderful book about critical thinking that's now being recommended by the Portuguese government.
Wow.
So. And similar Massimo Polidoro, they signed a contract with the Italian government that the skeptics group is going to lead their critical thinking seminars for teachers in universities. So that's another wonderful achievement.
Can I ask you, do you have any idea of what is needed to accomplish these very tangible goals? Because I'm not sure that anybody can do this. What are the qualities that are required to get those things done?
I think just we have to listen to each other more. It's very simple. I mean, we talk about confirmation bias and we talk about all kinds of biases that we have, but then we have issues with spotting it within ourselves because it's so ingrained, this idea of, a big nation and contrary to a smaller nation. So yeah, just pay attention and don't think just because someone is from a country you cannot pronounce that they didn't have anything to contribute.
I think that's absolutely right, but I think it also speaks not just to a patronizing view of other countries, but also perhaps to the ease at which we sort of slip into a bubble of familiarity. So and I think I've been guilty of it too. That when you get into skepticism, the skepticism you first see. This is what you sort of how you define your skepticism, and then sort of 10 years later, if you haven't kept that bubble open and kept looking for new things to add into it, what you find is you're still looking at what skepticism was 10 years ago, and you miss the new voices coming in, you miss the visibility, and you lose the access for ideas from places that you didn't know about getting in. So what do you think we can do to raise the visibility of other actors in this space so that we don't have a bubble effect?
Well, should this be also a little bit the responsibility of the people at the top? And I know that they will not like for me to call them people at the top, but this idea that if you are in a position of leadership, of influence, to actually give voice to the people kind of below you on the scale, to give them access to a wider audience. And I don't see that being done as much as perhaps it should.
Agreed.
I think one of the problems that I see in the United States is that a lot of skepticism, at least in the United States, and this goes all the way back to Harry Houdini, is based, if I may use some slang, on ponage, right? It's based on the idea of takedown videos. It's based on the idea of debunking and disproving.
Christopher Hitchens destroys
creationists. Slap, Hitch, slap, and destroy, and smash, and rah, we win. And the problem is that the new ideas that come in, they don't lend themselves to that, right? So, when we wouldn't have a moon landing hoax supporter in our midst in the United States, right? Because we all kind of got bored picking on Ray Comfort. I mean, I didn't get bored, but some of us got bored picking on Ray Comfort and the moon landing deniers and the 9/11 truthers. And so we turned to what an anonymous, largely white male audience asked us to take up next. And that was anti-feminism or racism or transmisogyny or something like that. And those are easy to pwn. And if you look at sort of the problems that are in our skeptic community today, I think it is largely because we are seeing a community that is looking for something to destroy. And what we see, I only speak from as an outside observer, what I see from the UK and especially from Europe is a group looking to educate. And we have some absolutely fantastic educators in the United States who do amazing work. But when it comes to the people who are causing the problems, it's because they're looking to destroy in the old school, not the new school of looking to educate the way I think European and UK skeptics do.
I think, yes. I think Mosh put it very pithily when he was talking about this skeptical adolescence, right? That so many of us are kind of stuck in this adolescence of rebelling against things. You've just discovered skepticism, so you're all about pointing out logical fallacies and owning people. But at some point, you kind of have to mature out of adolescence and learn compassion, because many of us, if not most of us, were once believers in something silly or stupid or inaccurate. And if we showed more compassion as opposed to just arrogance, I think we would get much further.
No, I think, I absolutely agree with the analogy that I gave you previously that you brought up right now. So
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for doing that. Claire, if I could return to something that you mentioned previously when you're pointing out the sort of the successes of Diana in Portugal and Massimo in Italy. You talk about collaboration with government. You talk about education. You talk about policy. Is this an area that we as skeptics are seeding while we're being distracted or while we're spending a lot of our time looking at owning ideas? Are we sort of losing the ground to other people because we're focusing on the wrong things at times?
I think so. Throughout Europe, even though we have, like I said, 23 country organizations, not all of them are called skeptic. And that's on purpose because the word skeptic has a negative connotation in many different cultures. So people choose adjacent names as rationalist or groups to research paranormal or the group against pseudoscience and stuff, things like that, because the word has such a negative connotation and it's used in different contexts. But sorry, I got lost in that. I
was talking about policy.
Policy, yeah. Well, I had some really good idea.
I can chime in if you.
No. Sorry. So
it has been a long weekend.
The reason why that's the cultural thing. Oh, but they're all trying to do the same thing, and that's influence their governments and their policies and to change what they're working on. But of course, they have to do it in a way that it's appealing to the public, and that's that's my thought. Yeah, they have to appeal to the public, which they can with the word skeptic. And even with some of the other rationalist organizations, they immediately get the label like, "Oh, you're mean to me, so I'm not going to listen to you." And I see that in the Czech skepticism as well. When someone mentions the skeptic group, they immediately just see the negative, angry skeptics that give out the prizes once a year for the biggest woo. It's kind of like a rusty razor thing. And yeah, that's kind of how they associate with us. And so when I go somewhere and they ask me what I do, I said, I'm a skeptic. Because immediately the what they see is, oh, you're going to be an angry, mean person to me, and I don't want to talk to you. So it's about kind of rebranding ourselves, and the only way how we can connect with the public is to show that skeptics are not mean and are not combative. What we're doing is for science, not against nonsense, even though it is what we do is against nonsense, but our first goal should be positive. And then once we get the public involved, we have chance to actually change public policy. Yeah. Sorry for the whole circumventing thing.
No, you've come full circle. It's like a flat Earth model.
Yeah.
I think that's something I'd absolutely agree with that, Claire. That even it isn't necessarily about changing what we're doing, but it's changing the way that we're talking about what we're doing, the way that we communicate it. It can be a case often that when we have a combative model of skepticism, it can seem, we might feel that we're doing a great amount of good against the person that we're shouting at, but to the people onlooking, they just see someone who's shouting and it doesn't look particularly great. But if they know that the reason we're doing this is because there's people over here being harmed and we're trying to protect those people, or we're trying to sort of watch their backs, we're trying to prevent people from being exploited, there's a much more sort of sympathetic message there. So is there something perhaps around the way that we communicate? Are we focusing too much on attacking the pseudoscientists and leaving behind the reasoning and the supportive, compassionate elements that justify the reason that we care about this stuff?
It's a tough balance, because I've been embroiled in some troubles over, basically mentioning a specific naturopath, for example. And so I've been advised to stay away from mentioning names, but sometimes you really have to, and it's very difficult to sort of decide where the line is, because you can talk in generalities and you can make up fake examples of stuff to educate the public without denouncing actual bad actors. But I'm not sure that it necessarily has the same kind of reach. Yeah, I'm still working on that.
I think when people come and visit our platforms, social media, websites, whatever, the content they should see most is the positive content of what we're doing, what we've done, what we've accomplished, what we're trying to do, what we're offering, talks, courses, pub meetings. And of course, there should be some kind of calling out of the bad science and of the people who are very dangerous with what they're pushing. But that should not be the main focus, because then it's just what we're standing against and not what we're standing for. And because we agree on our enemies, it kind of just widens the people that come to us. But if we make it more clear what we are standing for, that would also kind of clean our house, because it would make it very clear that this is what we stand for, this is not what we stand for. And it's not just about hating on creationists, it's actually doing good work and sending a positive message.
And I think it's maybe even about interrogating yourself as to why you're doing what you're doing. Are you doing this because this person's wrong and you want to be better than them? You want to show that you're right. You want to show that you know better. Or are you doing it because this person's wrong and someone's going to get hurt or someone's going to get misled? So it's about our motivations altruistic, or are our motivations kind of egotistical in that sense?
Yeah, something that I heard on a podcast once, which I thought was very useful, is how to comment in the comment sections, right? And it reaches out to your question of what are you trying to accomplish. And often the person that you're fighting with in the comment section, they're not open-minded at all. They have their ideas about pseudoscience, and they just want to take you down. And if you fall down that rabbit hole, I'm not sure that it's necessarily constructive or productive. So what I try to do is I try to respond to the question without necessarily addressing the person who's opened this that I'm arguing against, but to the lurkers, right? The people who are watching this, who are reading this, who are not interacting with me. I usually do it maybe twice, and then I say I'm leaving the conversation because this is not moving it's not moving the conversation forward. And I usually leave links in there for people who want to read more about this. And so in this way, if somebody is reading this without interacting with this discussion, I come off looking like a nice person and not some arrogant skeptic, and I'm leaving them, a trail of breadcrumbs of links to further get more information about this. And I'm not, I'm not interacting with this idiot on YouTube who just wants to take me down, basically.
Yeah.
And we should make it clear that we are skeptics because we care, not because we are stroking our ego.
Yeah, I mean, the example that I follow is my co-host No Illusions. So when I first joined our show, The Scathing Atheist, I was very eager to list my enemies. I was very eager to be on the show and be like, and I don't like so-and-so because he said this on Twitter, and I'm going to read it out loud, and then I'm going to be like, he's fat. And Noah has a policy that he uses in his diatribes that I think is a lesson that I have tried to internalize, sometimes very badly. Which is that we don't talk about people, we talk about ideas. And I think that's a tremendous thing that we can do as skeptics, is we can stop talking about the people we disagree with, and we can start talking about the ideas that we disagree with. Specifically, when you're countering someone who may be in our community who's picked up some poisonous ideas, if I say, I don't like Michael Marshall because this, that, and the other thing.
He's an aggressive drunk.
Right, he's an aggressive drunk, he punches people, racial slurs, all the things you've all seen Marsh do, right? If someone's a fan of Marsh and doesn't want to hear that, right? And we've all done this. I mean, I'll take a non-skeptic, Jordan B. Peterson. We've all at this point interacted with a Jordan B. Peterson fan and been like, actually, this is wrong. And they've been like, have you seen this 75-hour video where he eats lunch halfway through? And you're like, no. And they're like, well, then I have debunked you, right? Whereas when you talk about the ideas, any kind of ideas, whether it be trans misogyny or racism or 9/11 trutherism or moon landing denial, and you don't make it a personal thing, there's a way in that I think is very important. And that's an example that, again, I've tried to learn from that I think is very useful.
Yeah, I want to take a question from the audience in just a moment, but we've mentioned John B. Peterson. It would be remiss of me not to go to Jonathan, the Canadian, on the panel.
We apologize.
Yeah. There is an interesting thing here, which is there is a non-small subset of our community who do follow the ideas of Jordan B. Peterson, despite him being a Christian who promotes a pseudoscientific diet regime. What is it, do we think, is attracting people in our community to those ideas that, put forward by Deepak Chopra, would be dismissed as being woo?
I've been saying for a number of years that every skeptic has a blind spot, right? We all have blind spots. We all aspire to skepticism, but we're not. The human brain is so wired for these irrational beliefs and these shortcuts and these biases that it's very difficult to overcome all of them, especially if one of these beliefs is deeply entrenched around your identity, right? You get this core identity. And so we all have blind spots. I probably have a blind spot. I don't know. By definition, I wouldn't know what it is. But that's why it's a blind spot. And so you kind of rely on other people to point it out to you, and you have to be open-minded enough and sort of self-aware enough to take this seriously. I think that there are people in our community who have certain antiquated views about the role of women in society. About
No.
I know. Controversial statement, people. But of course, they don't want to come out and just say it this way. And so when you have a supposed intellectual professor who is basing his stuff on psychology and philosophy and all these things, it lands an air of legitimacy to these ideas. And I love it whenever I discuss with some of them. They always start with, well, I don't agree with everything that Jordan Peterson says because I'm a skeptic, but here's why he's right about everything. It's always the same. It's always like that. And I think that's what it is, that he speaks to, he intellectualizes very primal reactionary fears that some people hold. And because he uses these big words that often don't add up to anything that is coherent or logical, they can rest assured that their belief has been strengthened by actual evidence.
I think when it comes to alt-right figures, there's a couple of things that we need to keep in mind, especially when it comes to people like Jordan B. Peterson, or anyone who is sort of a niche media that is rejected by the mainstream, whether it be Richard Spencer or, one of these alt-right neo-Nazi figures who, advocate for genocide and something like that, which is, their followers have a vested interest in making them look larger than they are. And more importantly, and just to give you an example, I think this says absolutely everything that you need to know. How many of you here support creators on Patreon, right? Yeah, a bunch of you, right? And how many of you support at like the $1, $2, maybe even $5 level? Yeah. Okay, so alt-right figures, when the SPLC did research on this, and check it out, their average patron is giving $20 to $40 an episode. And that's because if you're a neo-Nazi in the United States, you can't watch TV. You can't watch movies because you're the bad guy. Indiana Jones punches you in the face. That's what the media says. And so you have a huge investment in making these groups seem larger than they are, and that is often your only media, your only news, your only source of entertainment. And so, when we do research into these kind of things and we find that the best example of this is the alt-right guy, Steph Molyneux. I don't know if you guys have heard of this guy.
We apologize for him as well.
I'm sensing a theme of these people here, Jonathan.
So one of the things that alt-right figures do is they sock puppet themselves. They create fake Facebook accounts and Twitter accounts, and then they agree with themselves and they silence people. But Steph Molyneux is bad at it, so he keeps forgetting to switch profiles. And so you can go online and see a bunch of him being like, I'm a 17-year-old girl from Ohio, and I want you to know I think you're great. And so one of the things that I think is important when we consider the popularity of Jordan B. Peterson or Ben Shapiro or any of these alt-right figures is that this popularity has always been around, right? There's always been Glenn Beck's and, there's always been these right figures. There was Father Murphy or whatever, the Catholic guy who was on the radio in the 50s.
He was solving crimes, wasn't he?
Yeah, exactly. All these crazy guys have been on the radio for a while. But now, because of the universality of the internet and because of its anonymity, we can sometimes be fooled into thinking they have larger followings than they do. If you do a little bit of research into this stuff and you find, okay, 40% of someone's Twitter followers are fake, or 75% of their YouTube videos are made by spiders or other resources and not by human beings, you realize that these are small figures, and the way to disempower them is to see them for who they are.
Yeah.
Should we, I mean, I think they're also tapping into this kind of victim complex, right? That these people are victims in our progressive society. And I think that will trigger a lot of people to give a lot of money to support these when they feel are minority voices who happen to be right. Is there something in there that we as skeptics can tap into? Because, I mean, it's a model that's working for them. I'm not saying that we should, paint ourselves as victims, but I mean, is there something there for us to learn? Because I mean, they go on each other's, YouTube channels and interviews, and that's how this large network of influence happened. Is there something there that we could learn and use it for better purposes?
Well, and not only do they go on each other's YouTube channels, they also have huge, especially in the United States, they have huge church funding. And that's something that we do need to really understand, is that theocracy funds a tremendous amount of the alt-right. When you dig down ever so slightly, they just did the Unite the Right Valley rally #2 in the United States, which is, of course, more than a year ago, where Heather Heyer was killed by a Nazi who drove his car through a group of people. And when it was revealed sort of who was planning that, there were churches donating buses, local churches donating buses to drive the Nazis around, stuff like that. There have been recent years where we've discovered that the KKK has infiltrated police departments and the FBI. So one of the things that we need to understand about the battle that we're fighting as skeptics, and I do think as skeptics, we are incredibly prepared to handle the alt-right, is they have money, they have organization, and they have time, right? If the Koch brothers provide anyone in this room a $60,000 studio to produce a YouTube channel, you'll get a lot of followers too. And
it's all about the battle of ideas.
Yeah, exactly. And it's important to realize that that funding is coming from somewhere, and you can start at the root. And in the United States, at least, a lot of that comes from the church, and it's important to keep that in mind.
I want to take a question from the audience now. If we do have one, we do have several. Seeing as you've already been mentioned, Dan, I'll get this across to you. Can you catch this? Speak into the black bit on the top of the circle. There we go.
It's on? It's on.
Yeah.
I'd like just to clarify something. Thank you, Claire, for mentioning our work.
It's not critical thinking. It's about alternative medicine.
No, it's also critical thinking. That's not the part I was clarifying. We didn't get any support from the government. We were indeed included in the recommended reading list for this year's books, so which was great for us, but it's.
Oh, I'm sorry. I had recycled information and I did not double check it. Yeah.
That's a bad skeptic.
Bad skeptic, exactly. Yeah.
And something that's really troubling me, and that I was expecting, and it's been touched upon to hear here in this panel, is it has to do with the alt-right and using supposedly scientific ideas to discriminate and to attack other people.
That's so funny. That was in my notes for this panel, exactly the same thing.
And one of the things that's really, really bothering me online the last few months is transphobia, and trying to use biology to say that woman is not a woman, because there are men and women and there's nothing else, and that is not biology. Please don't do that. So I don't know what's your thoughts on this problem.
I think it's very easy for educated people and for skeptics to go and cherry pick the scientific data that they like. A figure that I like to mention is that we have over 28,000 scientific journals right now. 28,000. So if you want to find a study that confirms your pre-existing belief, you can. And we're very good at it because, if you have a university background, if you're a skeptic, it's very easy to go through the literature, confirmation bias, you pick this one you like, this one you put aside, and then it's the battle of the studies, right? Well, I have a study. No, well, I have a study contradicts your study, and then nobody knows what to do with this.
But how can we as a community counteract that?
That's exactly what I was going to speak to. And again, so I seem to be blowing all my smoke up. No illusions asked for this talk. But one of the policies that we have on our shows is not that we don't say trans women are women and trans men are men and non-binary exists, but there is an assumption that people are welcome. in the community we create. We are a dick joke show full of the worst, darkest, meanest-spirited humor you will ever find. I will get fired from any job you care to put me up for. And yet, there is an assumption when you come to our shows that you are valid, that you are loved, and that we understand and accept you, and that if you're a woman or a minority, that we are listening to you and we want to elevate your voices. And that's something that we very powerfully believe in. And it's not something that we necessarily explicitly say in every episode. If you listen to our show, you won't necessarily hear us say on every episode that we're feminists, even though we are. We act like feminists. We put our, to say it, we put our money where our mouth is, and we create safe environments wherever we go. And I think that is truly the first step is, you know, we can't debunk non-personhood, right? That's not what our community was prepared for. We were prepared for 9/11 trutherism and Bigfoot, right? No one ever was like, Marsh, you're Bigfoot, right? but what we deal with when it comes to trans misogyny is for the first time turning to our own community and saying, you are not valid, you are not loved, you are mentally ill. And rather than turning and trying to debunk these arguments or give them sunlight or give them air, we instead not ignore them, but we move forward as a community. We've moved forward as content creators, knowing the truth and behaving as though these things are true. So that when people come to our community, they're not worried about whether or not there's a debate about their humanity. They are human, they are loved, and they are welcome here, and that is how we behave.
Just a practical tip for like everyday skeptics, because it's not just about the content creators, it's about each one of us in this community. We have to behave that way towards anyone. And then we have to call out when people are being assholes. Yeah, because it is up to us. It's the content creators have some responsibility, of course, and they're kind of responsible for the audience, sure. But we can't just think that it's going to come from above. It has to start with us and with each one of us.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think it's also when there are sort of leading figures in the movement who are acting in these ways that are so, awful, but also so contrary to a community. It's important for us as a community to address that and to try and reject those things from the community, because we need to be as welcoming as possible. And I think there's an old kind of idiom that organizations take on the personalities of their leadership. And if there are such a things as leaders and skeptics, we need to make sure that those leaders are from a welcoming background, are from with a diverse set of opinions, and are sort of encouraging in the way that we build a community. I think that's something we put at the heart of what we're doing. Do we have another question from the audience? Let's go. We'll go over there actually. Yeah, if that's all right.
Hiya, I was just wondering how we define alt-right. I recently, just out of curiosity, went down to the Day for Freedom, and after reading an article in The Guardian, I could almost think that I was alt-right or far-right myself, which is doubly worrying because I'm vegetarian. So I'd like to assure everyone I don't have any plans to invade Poland.
Who wants to say this?
So the trouble that comes with defining the alt-right is largely based on not being definable. That's actually one of their techniques. And without going into a super duper lengthy diatribe about it, you all were aware that an American movie came out a couple of months ago called Black Klansman.
It's awesome.
Yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful movie. But it's actually from a very important part of United States history where the FBI stopped tacitly approving of the KKK and actually interfered their ranks and arrested people for bombings and stuff like that. And they had a big meeting where they did something called disorganized resistance. And for those of you who are aware of the bombing in Oklahoma City by Timothy McVeigh, that is the disorganized resistance that they were talking about. And that policy carries forward today. So whether it be the Proud Boys or the alt-right or the alt-light or Breitbart or this or that or the other, one of the reasons why it's hard to define those movements is that the moment you can put a pin on them, you can fight them, which is why so often you'll find people saying, I'm not alt-right, I'm alt-light, or I'm not this, I'm not that. I'm a xenophile, but not a this. I'm a natural patriot of ethnic cleansing. I mean, even Richard Spencer is like, I'm not a Nazi, right? Like there is no limit to which they'll control it. And the answer is just allow yourself to control, to answer your question, allow yourself to control the definition. If someone tells you that the Jewish question is a valid thing for us to be discussing in 2018, they're all right. Whatever they define themselves of is none of your business.
But I think to bring us back to the panel, we're here to talk about the state of skepticism. I think as we're talking about the alt-right, it's this starts to come up. What is it, do you think, that leads some parts of this community to define in that way, or to identify with some of those ideas? What is it that makes some people prone? I mean, I saw, for example, even recently, Ayaan Hirsi Ali talking about how they should appoint Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. And this seems like a very surprising thing for someone who would have been a leading figure in the atheist movement, who'd been aligned, you'd imagine, to secularism, to be talking about someone who is a Christian, who would push forward a Christian agenda on the Supreme Court, an anti-feminist agenda on the Supreme Court. Why is it, do you think, that there are parts of our movement that will lean in that direction?
Well, I mean, something that I often hear, and it's sometimes maybe more of a disingenuous argument, but that's, the only thing that unifies atheists is the lack of a belief in a divinity. And so we're a very heterogeneous group, and sometimes we don't realize it. We just make assumptions about people because we agree on skepticism, so therefore we must be alike in every other way. But I mean, it's a giant catch-all term, and as I was mentioning earlier, we all have blind spots. Some people have more reactionary views than others. Is skepticism necessarily progressive, I wonder?
The hanging for
silence. Wow, dead silence.
I'm aware we've only got just less than 10 minutes. So I'll take one more audience question, then we'll focus a lot more on some of the more positive sides of what we're doing. I don't want to.
And next time, can you do the PhD dissertation of your question? Yeah.
I don't want to seem like everything is so catastrophic. There is some fantastic work going on as well. So
it's horrible. We're all going to die.
At the back of the room, actually. Yeah. There's a microphone there if you want to sort of.
Is there a way for skeptics to kind of emulate the success of people like Jordan Peterson, who appeals to a kind of, by challenging established opinions, appeals to a very niche and gets a large following? Skeptics could argue against things like the status quo, but that doesn't make sense. Like, for example, heavily restricted genetically modified crops in this country. Like, we can't grow genetically modified crops if no science says it's okay now.
Sorry, I don't think we want to appeal to a niche audience. We want to have I know, but I understand.
What I'm saying is like that the restrictions of genetically modified crops doesn't make sense in a lot of ways, but yet it's there. And you could say, like, could argue that this is how it's harming us by denying opportunities.
So should we be looking to sort of tackle the resistance to GM crops? I think that's something that skeptics are looking to tackle, perhaps not with the same level of prominence that some ideas of Peterson, for example, are getting. But I think that's not necessarily because we need to emulate the tactics that he's using. Unless someone disagrees with that.
I think there's a good tactic when talking about GE food or any really skeptical topic is to agree on values first. Something that somebody taught me, this idea that, before you begin to talk about the evidence behind GE crop, you ask the person, what do you want in your food supply? Okay, I want it to be nutritious. Okay. I want it to be cheap and affordable. Okay. I want it to be safe to eat. Good, fine. Tasty. All right. I agree with that. I agree with all those things. We're on the same side. We hold the same values. Okay, now that we're on the same side, let's look at the evidence together. So I think in that way you kind of avoid the antagonism, like right from the get-go. Oh, you're pro-GE food. I'm anti-GMOs. So agreeing on values first, I think, is a good way to go. I don't think that's what Peterson is doing. I'm not sure that we want to emulate him, but. Okay.
No, sure.
All right.
Okay. Anything else going on that? Or?
No.
Okay. Well, I don't want to end with too catastrophic view. So perhaps the panel could talk about some of the really positives of things that they're seeing in skepticism, some of the positive traits, some of the positive campaigns, tactics, things that we could be learning from and celebrating.
Well, I mean, the March for Science thing is still going on. I mean, that's a fun thing we can all participate in and promote. But yeah, it's for me, the most important thing the skeptic group should focus on is education and trying to get policies changed to have a better curriculum, because that's a universal problem in almost every country. Maybe just Sweden doesn't have that issue, but like the rest of us, the Nordic countries, I mean, we have terrible outdated curriculums. The curriculums do not, think about how kids should use the internet. They just say you can't use smartphones, but they don't teach them how to use them in a safe way that will that would contribute to their lives. So this is like a huge mountain that we have to scale. It's about pushing education. I'm going to plug myself. I have my own kind of critical thinking program that I go to various schools to teach, which can be translated and adopted in other places. But it's, again, a lot of our individual work, because we don't have that power yet to influence policy. But if we try to do as much individual work on the grassroots area, then we will have enough momentum to change policy.
2 quick little success stories. I think we should do a better job of working with journalists. I used to denounce them on social media all the time. Oh, that's bad journalism, bad. And now what I try to do is whenever I have time, I try to email the journalists instead and very politely and diplomatically say, hey, I read your article. Here are some things that I think, and now some of them see me as a reference to go to. And I'm walking in the shoes of my boss, Dr. Joe Schwartz at McGill, who has been working heavily with journalists over the years. And so now he is their go-to expert on scientific topics when they pertain to health. And so you see him on television, on the radio, in the newspaper being quoted all the time. And he provides a skeptical voice on a regular basis in Canada. So it is possible for us to do this. The second thing is on my podcast, as skeptics, we often sometimes maybe think that if you're not a scientist or a medical doctor, you can't get involved in skepticism because debunking looks like something that's out of your wheelhouse. But on our podcast, we have musicians, we have a webmaster who designed our website, we work with comedians, and these are all people who are skeptically minded, who do not have the training that I have as a scientist, but who have talents that I don't possess. And so their way of helping is to help us amplify our message by doing jingles for our podcast, by building us a website, by interviewing people on the street about the topic that we're covering on the podcast. So there are ways of sort of thinking outside the box of what can a skeptic do if you have a talent, if you can draw, if you can do music. You can use this talent to promote skepticism.
If I could just pick up on that, I think that's a very sort of salient point, and it's something I've always had in mind for events that I run and for things like QED. I've always wanted there to be a sense of community, that people feel that this is the thing that we're all together in, this is the thing that we possess, this is the thing that we all contribute to, and there aren't barriers to entry to that. You don't have to be from this kind of scientific background or be someone who's so well versed in debunking these ideas that you can explain your way through every single logical fallacy by rote. I like the idea of bringing together people from all sorts of backgrounds and talents and abilities and saying, right, once we're all here, we all care about something, we all care about the same thing. What can we all do together? And what can people go away and take away messages and take away ideas and then use their own talents in their own lives and their own worlds to spread sort of critical thinking that way, that through that kind of community feel, I think.
Hashtag diversity.
Well, yeah.
And I'm just going to build off what Marsh said, which is that I think I've gotten to be a sort of what not to do example. And that's been a victory for me. I am an ignorant, white, upper middle class kid from upstate New York who used to use the N-word and gay slurs because I thought it was funny, right? And I have discovered a community that has transformed me, not just from a person who didn't understand those things, but from someone who can reach out to people like me and tell them a better way to think about those ideas. And more importantly, to reach out to the people that I probably would have hurt before, the people that I probably would have damaged before, and make them feel welcome and make them feel loved. And one of the questions that I think we talked about a little bit when we were prepping this is we walk away from these events a lot of the time thinking, what can I do? Like, what do I do? What's the next step for me? And as someone who has gotten at this point dozens of messages from people saying, I was in the middle of a depression when I found your show and you helped me get therapy, or I had just had a suicide attempt and your show got me through, is you can create the community that people are safe in. And you can do it right now, and you don't have to ask anyone's permission to do it. And I know it because I've been lucky enough to be allowed into that community. So to me, that's the greatest success I could have asked for.
Excellent. Well, on that positive and uplifting note, I think we'll end this session for today. So please join me in thanking Claire Klingenberg, and Jonathan Jarry, and Eli Bosnick.
Michael Marshall.